Imagine losing your home, your community, and almost your life in the wake of a natural disaster. Your house, a place of safety and sanctuary, almost taking your life as it collapses upon you while you're trying to escape mudslides and flooding that accompanied Hurricane Helene. How would you navigate the loss, the grief, and the state of transition that follows? What can Buddhism teach us about finding ground in such unstable conditions? On today's episode, we are diving into it all. Today, I'm speaking with Deborah Eden Tull. Eden is a renowned Zen mindfulness and meditation teacher, author, spiritual activist, and sustainability educator. Eden joins us from the islands of Hawaii, where she and her husband Mark are being held by the Dharma community there, and they are recovering in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, where Eden and Mark lost their home, and Eden almost lost her life when their house collapsed on her. These massive tragedies, especially environmental disasters, are becoming more and more common in our day and age. Couple that with political chaos, division, and our ever-changing landscape of uncertainty, and it's no wonder that so many of us are struggling with anxiety, a sense of overwhelm, and perhaps even grief and anger in these times. In today's conversation, Eden and I are exploring the way that darkness and a state of liminality can be extreme teachers and even gifts for our awakening. May it be environmental disasters, loss, a breakup, joblessness, or more. How leaning into these experiences instead of away from them can help us stay awake and present and even find love in the midst of the hardest times. We're going to discuss how to navigate this very challenging state of limbo. This is something that I've been struggling with personally for some time, having a mother who is struggling with stage 4 cancer while also navigating a fertility journey. There's so much uncertainty in that. There's so much limbo. How can we find comfort in those times? Eden is going to share some beautiful wisdom from very raw firsthand experience as a survivor of a natural disaster and as a Zen mindfulness teacher. Without further ado, let's jump on in. Eden, welcome back to The Other Way.
Grateful to be here with you again. And I always love our conversations, and I'm feeling really curious about where today's conversation goes.
I am so honored to have you back, and I'm really looking forward to diving into today's conversation because, as we talked about right before we started, you've had quite an insane year to say the least, and I know that collectively we are going through a lot as a society, and I would love to dive into some of that.
Let's dive in. And yes, we'll touch some big topics today and just setting the intention together that what we co-create is of service to anyone who's listening. So welcome, everyone.
I love that. So before we start, I wasn't sure if I was going to ask this because I've had you on before and you've shared your answers to this question before, but I am curious, what are 3 words that you would describe yourself in this moment? And I don't know if you feel like that's been shifting for you at all.
Well, thank you. I found it a fascinating question because when we're asking that question in the context of practice, we're not talking about describing self in terms of self-identity. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something much deeper, maybe that we could refer to as essence, but we could also refer to it as simply as what is most alive and coming through us and emerging through us as we are vessels for interconnection, for consciousness right now. And I might answer that question on that level, that what describes me right now is first liminality, I am as dropped into the liminal, the space between, the space of not knowing, the space that is unscripted and full of possibility. And in a moment, we'll share a story of what circumstances led this to be a particularly liminal time. But collectively, we're also in a really liminal time, a really clearly unscripted time, a time of a lot of uncertainty. I'm also in this moment very much in a process of restoration and healing, and I'll talk more about that today. And I'm also feeling deeply steeped in curiosity. And curiosity is really the essence, the foundation of practice. But there are times in life when we touch the freedom of living even more fully in curiosity, the aliveness of curiosity, rather than in the kind of surface mind, I call it the mind of separation, narrative that thinks it knows what's going to happen next. So that's the frame I'll start us off with.
Yeah, well, we're jumping right in. That is powerful, especially the word liminality. That is so resonant. I would love to share a bit of backstory. You've had a wild couple of months. You and your husband, Mark, lost all of your belongings in Black Mountain as one of the victims of Hurricane Helene that hit North Carolina. I know also that you yourself were put in danger during that entire experience as well and nearly lost your lives. I would love for you to share, if you're willing, what happened. Walk us through a bit of that backstory.
Sure. So it was September 27th, and I had just come home from leading a retreat about my book, Luminous Darkness, and thought that we were cozying up for a few days of storm in the mountains where we live, outside of Asheville, just outside the town of Black Mountain. And we had really taken in whatever information we assumed was helpful about this coming storm, and were prepared in very seemingly now innocent ways, like had extra candles on hand for if the power went out, and had whatever we needed. My work was done for the week, so I knew if we were offline, we could just chillax and again have a cozy storm weekend. What happened that we didn't know was that for a few days prior to Friday, September 27th, there is so much rain coming down in the area that the earth got really, really over penetrated. And Friday morning, when we woke up and got out of bed, we became aware that the storm took a really unexpected turn. The feeling of it was like a tropical island storm, which is nothing we had ever experienced in the mountains where we live, moved in to the mountains. The temperature was different, the quality of wind was different, everything was different. And so we felt maybe that kind of animal body sense of alarm, what's happening here today. And everyone in our region was shocked. Really, what had happened is the night before, in the middle of the night, the storm had changed course to make where we live literally a bullseye of Hurricane Helene. And so, silence, reinforcement, how's the garden doing, just doing what we need to attend to. And my husband began reporting that there was dilapidation and degradation happening on our land like he had never seen, really quickly. So, the heart starts beating faster. There's an acceleration of energy and a sense of this is not like a storm that we've had before. A few minutes later, out of the blue, I was inside, and just imagine that the room right next to you inside, cozy in your home. Many of us think of our homes as the most safe place to be, just sort of our sanctuaries, right? And the room right next to me, which is my office and practice space and just a special place. Out of the blue, the loudest noise I'd ever heard, and that room got knocked off and taken down river about a quarter mile. By the way, there was no river there, but a river,
Oh.
a landslide, trees, debris, structures, I think a house, all came down and snapped it off in a split second. At that point, our hearts are beating faster. My husband's outside and he dove out of the way to stay safe when he heard that noise. And for the next, I'm guessing it was about an hour period, everything went downhill. And there's just a recognition of we're in danger and a recognition then of needing to move very mindfully as the landscape around us shifted at an accelerated rate in ways we hadn't imagined. A tree falling and crashing onto our living room, cracking the ceiling, the propane tank being burst open, his office, which is also where he keeps his plant medicines. He's a flower essence therapist and healer, being the next spot we knew this flood that had emerged would take. So we had to go and carefully save some of those medicines. We still thought being inside was the safest place because if you looked outside, it is not where you want it to be. We could see amounts of water taking over our land that we had never seen before. So there's an awe, there's fear, there's intensity, like we're suddenly in a movie we did not expect to be in today. You with me? We had taken a moment thinking we had time to, put shoes on, get water, get ready to make a conscious escape. He was closer to the front door. I was about 10 feet behind, and it was too late. The house came crashing down. We had no idea, but simultaneously, flood and landslide overtook our home. And I got taken down into something I had never previously imagined, down into the underworld. Felt the house on top of me and earth tumbling me. And I can't say I know how long it lasted because something that might feel in that experience like it was 10 minutes. So much was happening at a micro moment awareness. It probably was just a few minutes. And so I shared a prayer in that moment, which was, please either kill me or save me, but please do not bury me alive. And maybe about 30 seconds later, very magically, this thin window of air opened, like I'm being tumbled, and the tumble organized itself that I could slide out as quickly as humanly possible. And I just had time to slide out. I heard him screaming my name, and that told me where in the disorientation of absolute chaos. Our entire house had come down, a mudslide, flooding, everything. It was chaos. It told me where to go. And next thing you know, we're holding hands. I'm limping, and we're just going as rapidly as we can to the first neighbor's home that we see standing, and turning back over our shoulders and seeing that our home, our land, everything we owned, absolutely everything, was gone. And we were alive. And that was an extraordinary moment. So I'll pause there for a moment. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God, Eden, I struggle to find the words. I feel nauseated hearing you reflect and share just this experience of what sounds like a complete stripping apart a place that you thought was safe, a consuming of you within it, which is just so terrifying. And just knowing that all of this happened with, it feels like this intense force that came out of nowhere, to not even have the time to think about it and to prepare. And especially in the context of our world where we think we can control so many things, to just really not know what's going to come next and to have truly this incredible devastation be the result of that. I
Yeah.
just feel, yeah.
And more people are experiencing nature's might through these climate events that often come unexpectedly. One of the takeaways was, and friends joke that I don't need a reminder of impermanence. I've devoted my life to a practice and a way of life grounded in the sacred remembrance of impermanence. Impermanence has always been like a fire under my seat, calling me forth to how I show up in the world. And that's ever since experiences as a child of losing my father at a young age, losing others who I loved. But this carried an extraordinary reminder of how, while we have a choice in every moment for how we show up to life, how we meet life, we have no control over these
Amen.
storms. The acceleration that we've known will happen for a very long time has come sooner than we thought. Right now, at the time that you and I are recording, there's an acceleration of what one of my teachers, Joanna Macy, refers to as the great unraveling, and part of the great turning. A lot is happening right now, sooner than humans ever thought it would. A lot of disruption. And in the experience of that wake of that storm, a coming together happened and an awakening collectively in the region, in the community, that myself and many would describe as awe-inspiring. So as soon as we were in safe ground, then there was the recognition of what's happened in our neighborhood. And we live in the mountains, and many people needed help, and everyone showed up to help. Everyone who was well enough showed up in full force. I obviously, in that moment, was nursing an injury and really just dropped into deep spiritual practice, kind of feeling every cell of my body permeated by the intensity of what had just happened and by the fact that I was still alive. And my husband and neighbors went up the hill to help, for instance, unbury people, to
Mhm.
help find out who had been unaccounted for, to make sure everyone was okay. So that entire region, 5 states, was deeply devastated. And when volunteers and people came through, because we were really trapped on the mountain for the next week, as the roads had been totally damaged in the storm, we could not leave. And people hiked in, volunteers from places like Vermont and Alabama and South Carolina, and the benevolence reminds us of what would be possible every single day of ordinary life if people were to let go of the thin layer, the facade, the illusion of separation, the illusion that this can happen out there but not to me, the illusion of separation or distance between us and our neighbors. So it was
Yeah.
extraordinary to be part of such a, on a biblical level, in a sense, region showing up.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eden, there's so much here. First of all, my heart just completely cracks open hearing this story, and I'm so grateful that you and Mark are okay. And I feel so deeply for the people who also suffered with you in your community, as you shared at the beginning, like liminal time that we are going through as a collective. As somebody who is a Buddhist practitioner, a teacher, you mentioned that impermanence is something that has been very present for you for a very long time. But I think it can be so easy for us when we're caught up in our day to day that we forget this lesson of impermanence. And I'm wondering what your experience was like in that moment of witnessing the lack of control and witnessing the unknown, being face to face with it in this like powerful way that exceeds anything that most of us experience in our day to day. Was there an element of kind of shifting back into, oh, right, impermanence is present here? I
Ah,
feel like it can be inspiring for people to actually hear this because there's a difference between the lesson of impermanence and the experience of it.
thank you. First, I want to just remind us through practice, we learn that there's awakening that happens directly in the moment through direct experiential transmission. And there's an awakening that happens over time through the spirit of repetition in our practice. And many people can relate to um, the understanding that impermanence wakes us up again and again and again and again and again. So even if we feel like we know it in our bones, then we have a reminder through health or the fragility of someone we love's health. Then we have a reminder through the acceleration of what's happening in our world. We have a reminder through our house suddenly crashing down on us in Hurricane Helene, though I hope that's not an experience many others need to repeat. So we bow to the teacher of impermanence as one that revisits us again and again and again. Stay awake, don't go back to sleep. And, alongside the intensity of what happened and the loss and grief, like it's months later and we still have grief. Grief is a living process, an inner process that has to be honored, of no longer having that home, that community, that sanctuary. We're in a entirely different part of the world now. Also, simultaneously, it was an opportunity to take inventory and see, are there ways that we have been going to sleep to impermanence? And we were able to be reminded so fiercely of the power of our practice. So when I had the experience of thinking that I was being taken down, and yes, there was a shock, and there was yes, my prayer would be not to be buried alive. But there was also getting to witness awareness itself, meet the experience with pure innocence, curiosity, surrender, which is, I'm certain, why I didn't get more injured, a porousness. That is our meditation practice. Awareness is not perturbed by life in the same way that the finite self is. Awareness is limitless, is boundless, is equanimous. It's not an equanimity we need to, quote unquote, cultivate. It's that we need to remember who we are more sturdily as awareness itself. And so we could compassionately witness the human having the experience of going through that, as well as something much more timeless going through that, that carried a peace and acceptance. And that was really important to have affirmed for me as someone who's been practicing for a long time.
I feel so moved hearing you speak right now, Eden. And I so resonate with what you're sharing. I haven't been through a disaster like this or come so close to losing my life. I have not lost my home like this, but I reflect on my mother and her illness, and it's really wild how even in these moments of great loss and fear, these experiences that I dread more than anything or I fear more than anything, like a house collapsing on you, like that feels like stuff out of nightmares, apocalyptic. In those moments, there's also this, as you're describing it, almost like something greater in that awareness that feels in a way transcendent of the fear or that uncertainty and opens up to something quite beautiful. And I reflect on that with my mom's illness as well, where this feels like such a it's a horrible life or death experience that she's having, that fear for her, the loss, fearing losing her, but also there is something that is, I don't want to say transcended, but something opens up with that presence, with that love that comes up. it's truly something else, and it feels ironic in a way that some of these extremely difficult experiences have the seed of that within them.
Yes, I would consider it part of how we wake up through the partnership of dark and light. And let's just pause
Mhm.
for a minute and acknowledge that humans are a stubborn bunch. Humans have been very resistant to change, to waking up. And if it takes these experiences, if it takes more of these storms, if it takes bearing witness to an acceleration of uncertainty and a dismantling of things that have brought us comfort or a sense of knowing, the opportunity is, for people to acknowledge right now in my ordinary life today, what narrative, what limiting stories, what tiny, made up, small sense of self have I been feeding through comfort, that when that comfort is taken away, when I'm woken up to the intensity of life, I'm willing to let go, because our opportunity is to remember who and what we actually are beyond the separate self. And the illusion or trance of separation has permeated human consciousness for a long time. So for the record, I see these storms alongside the harm caused, alongside my constant prayer for least amount of harm, as allies for human consciousness to wake up. Similarly, and this won't be popular for many people listening, but it comes from my heart, I witnessed COVID, even through the harm it caused, even through people I loved and lost, as an ally for certain ways it helped to wake those who were ready to be woken up. So there's this partnership between these dark, more challenging experiences and the cracking the shell of human consciousness. I just want to name that when we were at the end of our East Coast journey after Hurricane Helene, we're beautifully held by community. Dharma community started a GoFundMe for us to support us. People offered their homes. We stayed, I think, in a different place every week for months and months. The last day, we were flying to the West Coast from New Jersey, where my husband's family is. There were 8 fires and 70-degree weather in November. In California, our last day there, which was January 7th, after I had led a couple of retreats, we looked out of the window of our plane before it took off, and we saw the start of the Palisades fire. We know so many people who lost their homes, who fled from their homes holding nothing but their kitty cat in that experience. So there needs to be, I believe, more of a collective recognition of the acceleration and of how practice can support us in both personal and community resilience. But also the question, what are the spiritual teachings of these events?
As you navigate the aftermath of this experience, you mentioned grief perhaps is coming up. How do you resist or navigate a pull of separation? Grief is a very difficult emotion. Perhaps anger might come up around why me? Like why did this happen? Or X, Y, and Z wasn't prepared for this situation, therefore I lost everything. And there can be so many emotions that in a way continue the trance of separation, and we might feel a pull to lean into those. How have you been navigating that? You yourself having lost everything and still recovering and still in that liminal space. How do you navigate some of those difficult emotions with awareness and presence?
Thank you for asking that. And first, I'll share I'm incredibly, incredibly privileged because I have many decades long of practice under my belt. I just want to say something to make a link here. Practice really is a preparation. It prepares us for death and for how to one day let go, surrender, into our death. And it also invites a death every day in terms of each time we step back and really wake up from thinking we are our thoughts, thinking we are our emotions, thinking we are the separate self. That is a death. It's a liberation too. It's a liberation, it's freedom, but it also requires a real surrender that can be scary to people at first. And so that said, I had many pathways for working with emotions. What I would offer people right now is sometimes we notice we take the path of who are the parts of me most suffering, most directly struggling with the circumstances that have arisen, and how can I turn towards and offer that embrace, that reassurance, that quality of presence that is not trying to solve, fix, or change someone, but really turning towards and being with discomfort as a pathway to compassion. Discomfort resiliency is one of the things we cultivate in this practice. On the other hand, and that might be more an expression of gentle compassion that I'm talking about, on the other hand, there's fierce compassion. I run the Fierce Compassion Sangha every Tuesday we meet. And that has a different energy to noticing when it's actually time to totally drop it. Time to just notice the contraction of ego arising or the impact of emotion taking center stage and learning how to let it go entirely. So just as an example, even recently, so we're here in Hawaii this winter. We are blessed to be in a place that Dharma friends have invited us to come to ground, to no longer be living out of a suitcase for a spell, to be with loved ones and fellow practitioners. And there was a period when I really first landed here and could finally drop in even more to some of the undercurrent of my feelings because the fall carried a lot of busyness. I was teaching, we were traveling, we were recovering. I had like a week of some stronger emotions coming up, and they were messy. And I was noticing my own navigation through inquiry of what is required here, what's needed. Is this an energy to turn towards and be with and embrace? And what I realized instead was, though through the help of my husband, who expressed a form of hard compassion, fierce compassion, my job in that moment in time was to totally drop it, to set him down, to see that those emotions I was actually starting to milk a little bit that week, to give more energy and attention to than was generous to the field. I hope that language is making sense to people. It's about moment by moment discernment. And with grief, it's important to know we cannot turn away from grief. It does not serve. I believe we're actually here in such a challenging place collectively because we have so much unmetabolized grief collectively. So being with our grief and feeling our feelings in a conscious way is really important. But at the same time, milking our grief or holding on to it longer than the process. Grief is a sacred process, an organic process. That is not necessary. So I want to apologize for the limitation of words in shorter conversations sometimes. But the main thing I want listeners to get is the quality of inquiry and discernment needed to navigate your own emotions. Where is gentle and where is fierce compassion the response?
Eden, that's very, very powerful because I feel like very often we hear about turning towards our feelings and being with them, but that notion of, you called it milking the emotion past its process or beyond its process, there is an element of grasping there as well that I don't think is always mentioned.
Yes, and story, even if it's a story of victimization or this happened and I'm still thinking about the loss of it. That takes us away from the only moment where our life is, this moment, right here and now, and the opportunity of this moment, because none of us know how long we have here. So really want to emphasize that choice for people.
Wow. That's so, so beautiful. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the collective trance of separation in the context of all of the grief and suffering that we are witnessing? I'll speak from my own experience, witnessing what happened in North Carolina, knowing you personally, and then witnessing what's happened in California. This hits home in a way that feels so much more personal than all of the things that we see on TV every day. But there is an element of overwhelm that can be present as well. Like we are witnessing tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. There's this global upheaval. We are in a collective liminal space. How do we navigate those moments where we are present but not show up from a place of separation and anger or grief and or overwhelm, but from a place of presence? How do we do that?
Thank you. First, I want to just offer the frame that, we do not wake up in isolation, we wake up together. So leaning into our togetherness is of utmost importance through the acceleration we are witnessing. I hold, the next one will be in March, conscious grief rituals that are beyond just grief, from a field called the Work That Reconnects that I teach, founded by Joanna Macy, who's now in her mid-90s. We come together for conscious ritual of honoring our pain and love for our world, for what's transpiring. It's incredibly powerful. And we do this online too, to do in community. And it helps to teach us how to turn towards and honor the process and teacher of grief within ourselves. I also want to offer the frame that because we do not wake up in isolation, the more we are willing in our practice to lean into the sense of, on behalf of our collective, I'm showing up to practice, I'm showing up with more courage, I'm showing up with more authenticity, I'm showing up with more vulnerability on behalf of our collective, and leaning into the support of the collective, really feeling that. Even the collective across time, the support of our ancestors and beings of the future, okay, who maybe seeds we're planting now will benefit, that we will never see the benefit of in this lifetime. That sense of for the collective, with the collective, is one of the most important ingredients in someone's practice. We won't be willing to do what practice takes for just a sense of ourselves. For the whole, for consciousness, we can access it. So that's really important for people to get. And listeners who have been practicing for some time know that what's happening in the world right now and the rapid changes that many couldn't have imagined, the forms in which they're taking, they're putting to, in a sense, a test what you have been cultivating, the quality of presence you have been cultivating. I said this earlier, but I'll underline it again. We really get to know through our meditation practice the qualities of awareness itself, and to recognize ourselves as this spacious, embracing, all welcoming, vast, still, energetically still field. The more we can bear witness from that place, not erasing action. I want to say that again, not erasing action, but knowing that any compassionate action, any useful action comes from that place. It emerges and shows itself to us from that place. Stillness has to come first. The T, deep listening, these qualities. And so if people are taking in the news too much without resourcing themselves and knowing how to access stillness too, if people are taking in the news and going right to judgment, opinion, reactivity, you're missing the opportunity, we might call it, of the pause, of being with from the receptive part of our being, that's the place that we will be guided from. That's my life experience. Yeah.
That's so, so profound. When it comes to the state of awakening, do you feel as though that is something that is more of a verb, where it is a state that we practice and it's something that we actively cultivate? So there's an activity within that? Or is it a state that wake up to and then fall asleep from?
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Awareness is already awake. We're continually remembering the already awakened state, or remembering that we are all whole. Yes, exact as we are in this messy moment in time. The name of our weekly meditation gathering is Remembering the Already Awakened State. Yeah, yeah. It's so much more about softening into and surrendering to, rather than a doing. Or, I joke about early in practice, I used to think I needed to be the solo, heroic, spiritual warrior, like battling the dark to get to enlightenment, to get to awakening. It's actually a very different motion, one more of a soft surrender.
Is that something that you would say happens moment by moment, or does it eventually become a state that we exist in? Because meditation, in many ways, and mindfulness practice feels very active, right? And we might have moments of experiencing through having awareness of, whoa, we were asleep and then we wake back up and it's a moment of awakening. Does that eventually become our state with enough of this cultivation and practice that it feels more like a state of the way we fall into sleep or awake in the morning, where it is a state that we surrender into and it is just the way that we are? Or is it something that requires that constant cultivation?
Well, here's what I think is interesting in your question. Often, when people first come to practice, and for a period of time, and a period of time that serves, so I'm not negating this phase. Practice maybe has different phase, different season, we could say. There's a period where people can be very identified with the I doing practice, the I doing my mindfulness practice, the I showing up to meditate, the I bearing witness, compassionate witness, the I doing this. And it can feel like a doing. I'm sure many listeners can relate. And from that place, though, there can still be a sense that I could get it right, I could get it wrong. There could still be a sense I could do enough, I could do not enough. There's still a separate self being maintained. Does that make sense? Then there's
Mhm.
a place, a time in someone's practice where that I begins to dissolve more. And it's actually more about, gonna use this word once again, surrender. Practice doing us, in a sense. Really, really having a different understanding. Letting go even more fully of the I, or separate self. And I also like to remind people that practice kind of goes into us in 3 dimensions. And the first is understanding. Like, how many of us, and I'll include myself in this, like long ago read something, heard something, was said that just let a light go off inside. There was a real understanding. I get this. We listen to a Dharma talk and there's a sense of understanding on one level. And then there's a phase of, maybe we call it practice or embodiment, like trying it on through the spirit of repetition, getting it on deeper and deeper levels. And then there's a third level, and that's realization, embodied realization. There are even things, I would say, beloved teacher said 25 years ago that may be like, taking a shower last week, something just dawned on me where I realized it on a cellular level. Every cell in this body has now gotten that. But it's a different way of understanding it. Even though I initially understood, we keep going deeper and deeper. That's why many teachers will repeat wisdom teachings. Something so simple like the teaching of beginner's mind in Zen, or the invitation to really be in not knowing. That can make great sense. When you first hear it, you can get it. But for me, like years later, that is still a profound teaching, which has taken on dimensions it never before had in life. You with me?
Yeah. You know
Yeah.
me too well. That was when you're like, your question's interesting. I was like, huh, why? And then we dive into the surrender. Oh, that's so good, Eden.
Oh, God.
I, yeah, that's so good. I have to ask, when it comes to living in a state of liminality, as you said at the very beginning, this is very present and real for you and for your husband, Mark, and for so many people. How are you working with this? I think that the liminal space, as we have talked about many, many times, is so uncomfortable. May it be the liminal space after a horrific tragedy and devastation, the liminal space of navigating the unknowns with an illness, or even the liminal space in between jobs or moves or relationship changes. How are you navigating it? And has your practice evolved or have new insights come through knowing that you're living this so intensely right now, literally living in between a home? If you could share about that.
Sure. So, the Latin root of the word liminality, limen, it points to the space between. Okay. So it's the space between, and it's also a threshold. It's also a threshold. That's very, very telling. And because I've been in love with practice for a long, long time, liminality has long been a teacher. You said it's uncomfortable. It becomes much less uncomfortable the more time we're willing to spend. And I also talk about this as time spent in darkness, in not knowing. Darkness as both symbol and metaphor. Light as the known, light as rational knowing, where many people feel safe. Light as form, light as manifestation. Darkness as not only the mystery, the unformed, the yin, still, receptive aspect of nature and consciousness, restoration as opposed to doing, but also simply light, insight, creativity, possibility. It all arises from darkness. So I, as a teacher, am very interested in people making peace with, embracing the teacher of darkness and the unknown. Back to your question, in this period of time, I'm grateful that I have spent the periods I have practicing with liminality, so that now when there's even more, and just to be practical for folks listening, that means like we don't know anything about life beyond May right now. And to be more honest, we don't know anything about life beyond this moment. No human really do. We think we do. But we've let go of our orientation through home, through schedule, through place. We don't yet know where we will land. I have teaching engagements this year, and so we know that we suspect we'll be at those retreats. But it's a very unknown time. It's also liminal because there's a spiritual process going on within both myself and my husband right now. That is the process of having let go and gone through a dismemberment, is one of the phrases we might use. And that puts you, when so much is lost suddenly and so much is changing in the world, so this is collective too, in a process of letting go where we might have been more familiar with forming, with having some illusion of control. It's just clearer than ever that you can't. What is liminality a threshold to? I believe love, to dropping into the essential presence of love in each moment. Love in capital letters with a wide expression of what that means or what form that takes. But it has been a beautiful time in terms of getting it, that this moment is what we have. How we show up to it is the most important choice. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much, Eden. Thank you. I could speak with you for hours as always, but we are coming up on time and I would love for you to share where can people find you? What do you have coming up that you would love to share with this community?
Thank you. Well, people can visit my website, DeborahEdenTull.com. You can find me on social media through Mindful Living Revolution. That's our nonprofit. And I've written a few books, so there's a wide range of retreats that I offer. But our next in-person retreat is in Colorado in May with climate scientist and dear friend and colleague Kriti Kenko, called Return to Source. There's a retreat at Esalen in early July. We have many retreats on the calendar this year, but also I'd invite people to consider joining around spring equinox for the Truth Mandala ritual that I mentioned, simply showing up to a Tuesday remembering. There are many, many ways, and I'll say that during this time of post-hurricane navigation, it's been really, really important to connect with others who are also feeling the invitation of this time and the intensity of this time. And I think one more thing I'll say is that there are also longer immersions for working with me. 6-month journey called The Heart of Listening on behalf of our collective and some other longer immersions. So you can just keep an eye on my website. I'll name that there's a lot being birthed through me right now. So I'm still in curiosity and awe about what teachings I will have to share after this period of restoration and also in response to so much changing in our country and our world right now. So the invitation is just to stay in touch. Just stay in touch if you feel called. And many people are finding my book, Relational Mindfulness, and also Luminous Darkness, very useful in this time of so much.
Thank you. And I have to share that it is very inspiring and it feels your presence and what you just shared feel almost in a way like an anchor in the chaos because you've been through so much and yet I can feel the love and presence that is coming forth through your words even today. And I think just bearing witness to that offers a lot of comfort. So thank you.
I hope our conversation was of service today and, really just want to offer, especially as people are taking in so much intense news right now, this reminder that we have to be leaning into our togetherness and the practices that allow us to ground, even amidst groundlessness, to find sacred ground every single day, to inhabit the moment rather than to inhabit the stories. They're wildly, wildly polarizing right now, and we do not need to give ourselves to feeding them. So thank you for what you're doing here. Really good to spend time.
Thank you so much for tuning into The Other Way. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps the podcast grow, and I'm ever so grateful. If you want to stay connected, you can find information on how in our show notes. And finally, if you're curious about inflow and want free resources around cyclical living or moon cycles, check out inflowplanner.com. And of course, for all my listeners, you can use the code podcast10 for 10% off any purchase. All right, that's all for today. See you next time.